And joining us now, TTC Chair Adam Giambrone, the Toronto City Councillor for Ward 18, Davenport. Nice to have you back here, Adam.
Thanks very much, Steve.
I always ask this question of you first. How'd you get here tonight?
I took the transit. I hopped on the subway. I'm at College and Bay now, so it was fairly easy to do.
Okay, because you know you may have heard there have been some questions about your use of taxis over the last little while.
Well, you know, I spend a lot of time on the road getting to meetings across the city, and sometimes, quite frankly, it's a need. I need to be in a cab, and so you figure it out 4 or 5 times a day, times 300 plus days a year. It's a lot of time on the TTC, and it's good because it gives me a chance to talk to our operators, talk to our passengers. There are some times when I have to get places in a taxi cab.
Okay, Adam, I have no hesitation telling you that I have a certain amount of discomfort at this point of our interview, because this is actually not a program that has kind of planted its flag by asking personal questions of politicians and their personal lives. However, your exit from the mayor's race was pretty high profile, and the reasons I think everybody knows now. I don't need to get into them again. This is your first sit-down feature interview since you dropped out of the mayor's race, and I feel somewhat of an obligation to ask questions that are not prurient, but at least nudge up to the edge of some of the issues that were involved. So I'm going to take my best shot here, and I hope you think this is fair, the way we handle this. Question number one, has all of what you've gone through rendered you too politically weak to be an effective chair for the TTC?
Well, you know, at this point, the TTC has a lot of challenges on its plate. It's in the midst of the largest expansion in the history of the TTC, the largest expansion in North America, and actually just this week, Transit City turned 3, and construction's underway. So I'm pretty proud about that, and I'm looking for
$11 billion project.
Basically, I mean, it's first phase is $8 billion and some, and then we have the subway underway. That's going ahead. Looking forward to ordering the tunnel boring machines in the coming months for the Eglinton line. I'm committed to seeing that through. We've got, as you know, some customer service challenges, and we've got a good panel of people. I'm committed to seeing that through. And in some ways, what it's allowed by stepping back from the mayor's race, it's allowed me to refocus on the TTC. The Commission has been very strong. It's focused on solving these problems, and the TTC has a lot of challenges, always does, and I'm looking forward to seeing those challenges through.
I hear you on that, but do people still respect you as a serious political force, given why you dropped out of the mayor's race, to be the head of this organization now?
You know, I've had Commission has been very strong. They're, of course, the group of politicians that sit on the Commission and oversee it. The mayor has been a very strong supporter. I mean, those are people that I look to for guidance in terms of my leadership, because that's sort of a report to the Commission, and the Commission is responsible to City Council. And again, if these last couple of weeks have allowed me to get back to the job that I love the most, which is actually being the chair of the TTC, because there's so many important things to do.
But before all those revelations came out, you probably were in a politically stronger position. If you wanted something done, you had the currency probably to get it done, or at least, put people in the place to get it done. Can you still do that?
I've had no problem since. I mean, the Commission is an agency of the City of Toronto, and ultimately reports to the mayor. And so he's the one who ultimately has to make these decisions, and we're continuing to work together to build this transit system. We have a lot on the go. We can't, at this point, we couldn't really just stop. There's too much going on.
But you don't feel any politically weaker right now?
No, I mean, quite frankly, I feel focused on getting back to the job and really being, yesterday I had the chance to talk about the waterfront projects, because for Pan Am, get back on the solar panels, so deal with hydro, and deal with a particular project, our station modernization. So it's all really that focus comes back and just get it done, which is absolutely critical.
This is a bit of a kind of how much do we have a right to know kind of a question, but do you think the public has a legitimate right to know about the circumstances behind the scenes which saw you exit the mayor's race?
I think that I think in politics, our current situation is such that the media likes to look into people's private lives. I think they have a right to know things that affect the direct political affairs of the city, province, or federal government. I really think that in general, probably the media wants to go a little too far, and they need to step back and actually focus on more of the policy issues. Whether in fact how you're doing as the chair of the TTC, or the mayor, or the premier, or the prime minister, not so much the other issues, because there are a lot of really fundamental issues here, and you can get sidetracked on issues that actually, at the end of the day, and in most countries, aren't a big deal.
This may not come as shocking news to you, but transit policy does not sell newspapers like text messages do.
Yeah, well, that's right, and that's sad because at the end of the day, this city depends on public transit. This is the second largest transit authority in Canada and the United States, second only to New York City, and transit matters to the city, and people actually do care, and this is why people are upset. They want to have good quality transit. They want to have expansion of this transit. They have a whole list of things. And there's some very fundamental questions about funding, about how we go about providing transit services. And you're right, they may not be as interesting when you get into the details, but actually I think people, when they step back, those are the things that they're actually most concerned about at the end of the day.
Okay, one more before we talk more specifically about what's going on at the TTC. Do you think you got a raw deal?
I don't think that's a really relevant question, Steve.
I asked a lot of irrelevant questions and put that one on the list.
It's fair enough. But at the end of the day, what happened. You benefit from hindsight. You'll learn from what you go through. You pick up, and then you just keep moving on. And so at some point, you can go back and doing analysis about how it played out. What's most important is to figure out what happened, what lessons you can learn, how you can go about correcting any mistakes you had, and then pulling that all together, pick up, and just keep moving forward.
And the biggest lesson was?
Well, I think for me, the biggest lesson is that in public life here in North America, basically everything is on the table. So you have to be very clear about how you go about living your life in terms of your day-to-day interactions, both publicly and privately, and you have to be prepared for all of that to be part of a discussion in public. Do I think that should happen? No. Do I think a lot of people think that it shouldn't happen? Yes. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. So you have to, knowing that, you have to learn your personal lessons, and I don't really talk about the personal situations. Those are to deal with for me and my family. But you just have to realize these things and learn as much as you can, pick up and go on.
Are you running again?
I haven't made that decision, Steve. I mean, in some way, I think I told someone today I'm interested in the speculation out there, but I haven't made a decision. I mean, I know that if I get out there, the people in Ward 18 have been very good. They've, it's actually galvanized our support. Some people weren't supportive. I won with 67%. I can't take that for granted, but I'm confident, go out there and knock on doors, talk to people, that I could win if I went out there and did that. I'll make a decision if that's my next move.
Okay, let's talk transit. I'm going to raise some things here that come as no surprise to you, but for those who live outside the city of Toronto who may not be aware of all this, Michael, let's bring this up if we can. April 2008, TTC employees staged a 2-day strike before being legislated back to work. There was the fare hike from $2.75 at the cash fare to $3 this past January. Fare hikes are never very popular. Also January, that infamous picture of the ticket collector asleep at his post, that went viral, followed shortly thereafter by another one. And then last month, there was the driver who stopped his bus to go for a coffee, keeping patrons waiting more than 7 minutes. And just this week, we find out a TTC driver was suspended for driving with alcohol in her system, though not over the legal limit. And also a TTC driver caught wearing sunglasses and an iPod, which doesn't exactly scream out, "I care about my customers." So, do you have a customer service crisis on your hands?
I think you can get into a debate on each one of those items and what the situation is, but at the end of the day, put it together, and you laid it out. I mean, the TTC has a challenge when it comes to how it delivers customer service. And one of the things,
Not challenge, crisis. Well, do you have a crisis on your hands?
You can call it a crisis. You can call it. For the crisis creates a challenge, and that's where it actually becomes interesting. When we had a challenge on our safety issues a couple of years ago, where we actually had a person die in a tunnel accident, we'd had other accidents. That caused a whole revolution in terms of safety culture. Today, TTC leads North America. Absenteeism is down by 50% due to injuries. We've got a safety culture that is being recognized around North America.
And all of that stuff becomes irrelevant when people hear about this.
But,
you know that.
But that's
one little incident wrecks all of that.
But that's a different subject. But what I'm suggesting is that when we had a crisis, how we responded was quite impressive. And we've had other instances where the TTC responds fairly well in these situations. So what I'm thinking is that over the coming months with our new customer service panel, some of the other initiatives that we had, we're going to have a chance to prove that we can take this crisis. You should never let a good crisis pass without using it as using it as an opportunity to make change. And we've done that in the past. We had the Russell Hill accident in '95, which caused a whole revolution in how we do our state of good repair capital plans. I talked about the safety, all different issues, but what they both were opportunities. And I intend to use this opportunity, this crisis as you call it, as a way forward to make the improvements we need to do.
The TTC driver who stopped for the coffee, when apparently one of the passengers who complained about this and went to him and said this is not good what you're doing. And the driver is alleged to have said by this passenger, look, you can't do anything to me, I got a union that's going to protect me. Why does the union defend the indefensible?
Well, I mean, I can't really speak for the union. You bring Bob Kinnear on to have him talk about his communication
how
strategy.
about this? Does the union defend the indefensible?
I think the union has a job to do in terms of representing its workers. We go through a series of grievances on all of these matters. At the end of the day, the TTC has to be very clear and decisive on what it expects from its employees. It's got rules. It's got to enforce them. There's always going to be, in 13,000 people, you are going to have a bad apple here and there.
Are you going to fire that driver who had the alcohol in her system?
I can't talk about the individual but I will tell you, Steve, that it is general policy that people are terminated if, without other circumstances, if they have blood alcohol levels above zero. But I can't speak about the specifics.
Okay, you can't speak the specifics, but clearly, if she had alcohol in her system, that violates the policy.
That's right.
If the policy is she gets fired, then if A plus B equals C, she's going to be fired.
Well, I can't speak about that particular one, but yes, your logic is correct.
Let me read something from the Toronto Star. Christopher Hume wrote this last month. There's nothing wrong with a TTC Passenger's Bill of Rights, nothing wrong either with setting up a customer service advisory panel. However, these moves represent a somewhat belated attempt to catch up to the realities of the 21st century transit. There's been a culture change, argues TTC Vice Chair Joe Mihevc. Now it's about the experience of the ride. Between them, TTC Chair Adam Giambrone and General Manager Gary Webster have failed to adapt to the changing landscape. We live in an age of entitlement. The TTC exists to serve us. And when you're charging $3 a ride, more than $110 for a monthly pass, those feelings of entitlement are exacerbated. Yeah. Do you think the Commission understands the mindset of today's transit rider?
I think a lot of the challenges, and you think about when people talk about customer service, they're talking sometimes about our employees, that's one, and that's something that's very much within our control. They talk about how they pay their fares. Well, that's a $400 million question, right, for a smart card or automatic fare payment. They talk about whether stations are clean or renovated. That's a financial question, one that goes to how we fund transit in the city, which is the least funded transit organization or transit corporation in North America.
By a senior level of government, you mean?
By any level, collectively. Now, the city does its share, contributes a lion's share, but in New York City, per passenger, they have 3 times as much money per passenger to spend. So, looking at here, we'd be looking at, over $500 million. I can tell you that with that, you'd have automatic ticketing very quickly, you'd have renovated stations, you'd have more service on the street. It wouldn't necessarily, unless we took other actions, address how our employees interacted with people, but that's something that's very much in our control. And that, this customer service panel is going to have some of those challenges. We've already started changes in training. We're going to do more. Okay, but at the end of the day, some of those things are really going to be what people expect when you hear them talk customer service. Some of them are financial ones as well.
Okay, but at a very basic level, we're trying to get our heads around the culture or the mindset of the person who uses the TTC. Do you have a good sense about what they expect when they put their token, ticket, cash, MetroPass, whatever, into the box?
People expect that they will have polite employees. They expect that they will have vehicles that are in good shape. They will expect that the service is delivered in a timely manner when it's expected. And they expect to have an experience, whether it's air-conditioned buses in the summer, adequately heated vehicles in the winter. I mean, these are clean stations. This is what people expect.
Okay, and on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are you doing at that list?
North America compared to our other properties like New York, Chicago, Boston, London, Paris, or just in the abstract?
I'd say, if 10 out of 10... No, I hear what you're saying. So let's say that list you just gave, if you're doing 10 out of 10 compared to the standards that you've set for yourself, that's something I need to know. How are you doing on that scale compared to the standards you've set for yourself?
So what I think we should be delivering in this city, which would require hundreds of millions of dollars more of subsidy a year, I think we're somewhere around a 6.5 out of 10. I think when you compare it to the other major properties that I listed, and you can throw in Montreal and sort of do an aggregated, we're probably up higher around 8.5 or 9.
All things relative.
All things relative. You talk to anyone in their transit cities, they're all frustrated. New York has many of the challenges, Boston, London, Paris, Montreal. They face a lot of these challenges. So that's not an excuse. We need to strive against an ideal, and that's why you give those two. But we also have to be somewhat realistic, and we have to remember that as much as training of employees is under our control, things like that, there are some bigger questions, as I say, because customer service, from what I hear from people, and when I'm up on the system, what I expect as a rider, because I've never owned a car, I get out and use it, despite all the other comments. I'm on it 3 or 4 times a day, different modes. Those are, people expect a whole suite of things.
Okay, let me ask one last thing before we go join the others on the other side of the studio. In the last 2 years, if you've lived in Toronto, you've seen a TTC strike, a garbage strike, a fight over closing school pools, broken water mains, property tax increases probably more than you want. There is sometimes a sense that the city isn't exactly as Peter Ustinov described it, New York run by the Swiss. Are people who, in your view, who are complaining about the TTC really mad about the TTC, or does this speak more to a kind of a general unhappiness with the overall management of the city?
I don't know about that, but I do know that this is a transit city, and why. And you know, when you have somewhere around 185 trips per capita compared to like 40 in Mississauga, or like 6 or 4 in some of the regions around.
471 million rides
and we're
a
going to
year.
be higher this year. Ridership is up this year despite the fare increase. And when you put that together, it's a transit city. People, even if they don't ride it, they know how important it is to say that's a good thing. That debate you wouldn't be having in Chicago as much, even though Chicago is having huge problems with their system because it doesn't carry, it's a bigger system, but it carries only 60% of what our system carries, because theirs isn't a transit city, despite the fact that Chicago is a good city, and that means that the debate here in Toronto is always going to be big when it comes to transit.
Okay, Adam, we thank you for coming in tonight. We have others who want to continue the discussion on the other side of the studio, so if you would, join me and let's do it.
That's good.